Hi, I'm Allison Matthews. Welcome to Cleopatra at the Podium, Shakespeare, Women's Voices, and Leadership. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. I'm grateful to be here, grateful to live and work and learn in this beautiful place. I'm an actor, a voice artist, and voice coach, and I have been the head of coaching for Bard on the Beach, which is a wonderful Shakespeare festival in Vancouver, Canada. I was the coach there up until the pandemic hit last year. It's a job I created back in 2008. I proposed it to the festival and then spent over a decade building and developing that work. I just wanted to say that because normally I would just say my title, but because we're talking today about women's voices and leadership, it feels important to articulate work that's mine, the things that I have accomplished. If women don't own their successes and accomplishments by speaking them out loud, do we make it harder or easier to be perceived as leaders? That's one of the questions I'm interested in right now. I'm always interested in ways that women can find inspiration for leadership. So I guess because I'm a coach, often working with actors performing classical theater on stage, Shakespeare is often a source of inspiration for me. Not the only one, but it's the one I want to focus on today. I was recently studying one of Shakespeare's plays, Antony and Cleopatra, and I became more and more interested in the way that that character of Cleopatra brings this sense of infinite variety and possibility to that story, and in fact, how she holds space in the text of the play itself. I had a thought that she's demonstrating a leadership style which is quite inspiring. It's multifaceted and it's expansive. So today I want to talk about how her presence opens up some possibilities for us to feel agency in our own leadership roles. I might also offer a few voice exercises and a bit of text analysis. This idea of being expansive is something I'm curious about because when the norm or the default for leadership only represents 48% of the population, we have to start to see and hear the possibility of something different, something else, and something more. It has to expand, not exclude. Now, interpreters have worked for centuries on this play by Shakespeare, trying to partition Cleopatra and her words and her voice. So let's just set the record straight. She is the center of this story. Her presence is woven into the text of this story at the deepest level. People usually describe this play as being about the romantic relationship between Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, during the final war of the Roman Republic. And if you're not familiar with it, please don't worry. I'm going to be talking about it from a very 2021 perspective. And if anything I say piques your interest, you can always look online for a production to watch or listen to an audio recording. I never recommend reading the play because I feel like these stories were written to be performed and to be experienced live and in person. Even on film is better than in a book. The play is described as a tragedy, and sometimes it's described as a romance. I've even heard it described as a comedy. So there seems to be some problem with the classification. It's a play that defies genre in some ways that are interesting. It has a massive scope. The story travels from Egypt to Rome and back again, and the circumstances are intensely heightened. But somehow it's also a very domestic story. So the play, the story, like Cleopatra, is full of infinite variety. We're told that Shakespeare worked from source material written by Plutarch. But everyone seems to agree that Shakespeare's portrayal of this central character, Cleopatra, is very different from the source. He had more admiration, more physical and sensual understanding of this woman. The Canadian actor and director Lois Anderson would say Shakespeare rolled the story forward in terms of progress. So today, I hope we can roll some things forward too. If we can do that, then an old story can still be useful to us in 2021. So I want to start by saying this is the story of a woman who is a powerful leader. Yes, it is her story. We can argue as much as we want about how there are two characters named in the title, but Cleopatra is the tragic hero. It is her journey that we are tracking. The Shakespeare scholar Emma Smith explains the shape of the tragedy is organized around Cleopatra's life. Antony's death is not the end of the play, but when Cleopatra expires, it is indeed all over. In controlling the play's final movement, Cleopatra has the structural equivalence of a Hamlet, or Macbeth, or King Lear, or Othello, the key position in the tragedy. That's from Emma Smith's wonderful book, This is Shakespeare, which is available through Penguin. Smith also points out that this is part of the reason that this play is considered so problematic. There's this woman occupying the hero space, which had always been occupied by men. So I'm interested in how Shakespeare structurally shows us that the norm has been male. And now, with the possibility of a woman holding this central position, the structure itself is being challenged. I wonder if that's useful in thinking about how women challenge other structures today in public life, in the political world, in all kinds of public office, and even in their personal lives. Of course, in their personal lives. So this play is deeply problematic in a lot of ways, and I think our modern perspectives can and should grapple with those problems. We're in a time of intense questioning of many things and wondering whether there's even a point to grappling with Shakespeare at all, or if there would be more value in turning our attention to other stories. That conversation is necessary, and I honor it. As well, and more important, it is not for me to speak to the experience of being a woman of color. So the perspective that I want to offer today is that of a coach who studies text and voice, and I want to open up different possibilities. In doing so, I will be irreverent with this text because I think we can use it as a launch pad, a jumping off point to investigate the question of women's voices in leadership, how their voices are perceived. Let's look first of all, when we talk about voice, at Cleopatra's voice. To get an example of the voice that speaks through the text through her. In one of her famous speeches, she says this: "His face was as the heavens, and therein stuck a sun and moon which kept their course and lighted the little O, the earth. His legs bestrid the ocean, his reared arm crested the world, his voice was propertied as all the tuned spheres, and that to friends. But when he meant to quail and shake the orb, he was as rattling thunder. For his bounty there was no winter in it, an autumn 'twas, that grew the more by reaping. His delights were dolphin-like, they showed his back above the element they lived in. In his livery walked crowns and crownets. Realms and islands were as plates dropped from his pocket." Now, some people say that the purpose of this speech is to show that Antony was an epic warrior, or they say that it's an example of how much Cleopatra exaggerates. I disagree with both of those interpretations. It feels to me like her purpose here is to honor someone she loves and to inspire her listeners, and that's a good leadership topic. It's also an example, I wanted to play it right away because it's a good example of her expansive thinking. She's describing the human connection to the earth, the planet, the cosmos, and the land itself. She's reminding her listeners that humans are animals, that we are connected to animals, and that our lives and even our natures are like seasons. She's articulating our connection to the universe. She's articulating our connection to earth and generative properties. She reminds us of the value of biodiversity, as Randall Martin would say in his excellent book, Shakespeare and Ecology. That's available through Oxford Shakespeare Topics. As Martin describes, there is so much about the way we are shown Egypt and this woman that relates to the life cycle, and even some of the symbols that we've taken in a kind of mainstream patriarchal view, like the symbol of the serpent, to be related to temptation and a kind of Judeo-Christian model. And in fact, there's a broader, deeper, more instinctive connection to the earth and the cycle of life that relates to snakes and worms and the creatures that help us move through the phases of what it is to be alive and then to provide food for the next living things. So I would really encourage you to have a look at that wonderful book, Shakespeare and Ecology. And I just want to return to this idea of how we could roll forward this story by giving you a very brief summary before we go too much further into the play and the story itself. If I can, I'll characterize it through the lens of Cleopatra. We could characterize the hero as a queen who is in her element, a success, a mature woman enjoying being in her prime and secure in the legacy she will leave when she dies. Her lover returns to his country, which is embroiled in a lot of complicated battles. He appears to leave reluctantly and sends back gifts to her, but then she finds out he has, in fact, married another woman. He returns to her later with promises of geopolitical benefit to her and her people. But instead, the Romans attack, seeking to invade the country and colonize the country. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on the back and forth battles that are characterizing the middle of the play, Acts 3 and Acts 4. They're rapid fire, they're very confusing, they've been described as virtually unstageable. And the bottom line is scholars have spent years analyzing the minutiae of those details and the battles in the context of Roman history. So that just feels like another way to keep the focus of the movements on the empire, not on Cleopatra. So it's not really valuable for this discussion. She dies at the end of the play in the company of her women, Charmian and Iris. They die too. So probably in my revisionist version of the story, I would change that ending. But these are just the plot points so that we understand the texts as we look at them. Her words in the speech I just showed you are good examples of the lush and layered and expansive poetry we see her placing in this story. And we see that not just in her words, but in the words of characters who describe her. So there's a famous speech by Enobarbus, which you may or may not be familiar with. I'll just show it to you here. This is describing the first time that he and some of the other Romans see Cleopatra. And he says, "The barge she sat in, like a burnished throne, burned on the water. The poop was beaten gold, purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat to follow faster, as amorous of their strokes. For her own person, it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion, cloth of gold, of tissue, over picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature. On each side her stood pretty dimpled boys, like smiling cupids, with divers colored fans, whose wind did seem to glow the delicate cheeks which they did cool. and what they undid, did. Now, I use this text in coaching sessions with actors. You'll see that I've highlighted various words. We go through this text layer by layer to see the imagery that's used here. And in this case, all of the senses are being stimulated. So if you look at the verbs, the nouns, the adjectives, and feel free to do this for yourself, you'll find descriptions of the elements. We have fire in the burnished throne, which burned on the water. We have air in the winds that were lovesick. And the water which they beat, follows faster. We also have a range of materials like metal in the beaten gold and the silver ores. There's colorful cloth of gold tissue, purple sails, diverse colored fans. There is music in the tune of the flutes, and there is art, Venus and the smiling cupids. Notice the senses being stimulated as well, the smell of the perfume. There's an intricate detail and delicacy in that gold tissue, but that's also placed right up against this very muscular sexual action of beating faster and an amorous response to the strokes. It builds to this intoxicating, almost overwhelming description, expansive, yet also full of contradictions. So the wind both cools the cheeks and makes them glow. What they undid, did. So even though this text is spoken about Cleopatra, not by her, it's still drawing our attention to her presence. Powerful presence, infinite variety, endless possibilities. So in this story, her oral and auditory footprint, or I should say voice print, is really potent. Now, the thing is that not everyone likes it when a woman has a powerful presence. Women in leadership aren't always perceived in a positive light. I know this may shock you. But at the start of this play, we get an example of the other side, another character who describes Cleopatra very differently. These words are spoken by Philo, one of the Roman soldiers.
Nay, but this dotage of our generals o'erflows the measure. Those his goodly eyes that o'er the files and musters of the war have glowed like plated Mars now bend. Now turn the office and devotion of their view upon a tawny front. His captain's heart, which in the scuffles of great fights hath burst the buckles on his breast, reneges all temper, and is become the bellows and the fan to cool a gypsy's lust.
So I'm not sure if you could hear that, or maybe feel that percussive quality, the flexing of muscle through those plosive and fricative consonants. There's a feeling of violence. The point there is that Cleopatra is racialized and sexualized before we even meet her. This strikes me, this opening, as an attempt to establish a male Roman Empire colonizer voice as the default or the norm, the struggle to try to tell the story through that lens, from that point of view. Susan B. Anthony said, no advanced step taken by women has been so bitterly contested as that of speaking in public. For nothing which they have attempted, not even to secure the suffrage, have they been so abused, condemned, and antagonized. End quote. Female leaders' voices are scrutinized in ways and to degrees that I've never heard men's voices judged. There's often a questioning of fitness embedded in that judgment. So people will describe a woman's voice as shrill. That's a sound quality description, but it cleverly also hints at emotion. So someone whose voice is shrill could also be slightly hysterical and therefore not fit to lead. So this undermining is done by attributing an emotional state to a vocal or sound quality. But things may be changing. Now in 2021, Robin Given talks about Kamala Harris in her wonderful article in the Washington Post. The title of that article is "The Sound of a Shifting Power Structure." And Given says, she doesn't have a news anchor voice, one that is trained and practiced at staying at a low register. But henceforth, gravitas is no longer measured in octaves. To be girlish is to be powerful, because power is redefined. End quote. What was Cleopatra's voice like? We get no hints about the quality of her voice from Shakespeare. All his descriptions of her, voice, body, personality, everything, is a non-description. She is everything, constantly changing. She is like a prism. Enobarbus literally says, for her own person, it beggared all description. So the idea of description itself is made bereft by her. But voice does seem important for a role like this. Voice is a powerful tool. Now, we have really, I think, deeply entrenched notions of what gravitas and power sounds like. With a role like Cleopatra, the sexuality is a part of that as well. We have some deeply entrenched notions about that. I could spend all day deconstructing and analyzing that. But for now, let me just speak as a voice coach and say that the actor playing this part needs a strong, flexible, and responsive instrument in order to convey the range and the heft of this character's vocal and verbal performance. This role has a lot of lines, and there's a lot of action, and the character needs to respond to a range of circumstances, all very heightened. What's great is that actors have talked about the stamina that's needed to command the stage for the full arc of Cleopatra's journey. If you want to hear great examples of this, have a listen to the wonderful Donna Kroll on Dr. Varsha Panjwani's excellent podcast called Women and Shakespeare. As well, you can find video clips of Josette Simon, who recently played Cleopatra at the age of 57, and she brought an incredible brightness and lightness and play into her sound, along with the experience and maturity that she had. I use a breath exercise, which many of my clients find helpful in practicing more effective speech delivery. I'll just describe it very simply. I'm just inviting them to breathe between each statement that they speak. So we can try this together. For example, if my text was just to introduce myself and describe the color of the top I'm wearing, I might say this. Hi, I'm Allison Matthews, and today I am wearing a multicolored top with blue, green, red, and white dots. And now you go ahead and do the same thing. Just say hello, say your name, and what color top you're wearing. Great. The next step is to quite deliberately breathe between each statement. Something like this. Hi. My name is Allison Matthews. And today I'm wearing a multicolored top with blue, green, red, and white polka dots. Go ahead and try that. I'll wait. Now that should have taken you more time than the first time you spoke it. And to be clear, it's not meant to sound natural. I'm interested in how or whether this allows you to put more of your energy and expression into the words themselves. As Cicely Berry, the great voice coach, would say, to be on your words rather than anticipating and racing ahead to think of what you're going to say next. So, what I've discovered most often is that for men, this helps them to reduce the number of filler words they use, those ums and ahs that will sometimes creep in when you're searching for the next thought. The breath acts as a placeholder in the same way that the filler word did, and it allows the energy of the voice to be placed in the words themselves as opposed to getting dissipated through those fillers. The interesting thing is that most men are quite comfortable holding the floor and just allowing the listener to wait while they breathe because they know that the next thought will come and they have no reason to wonder if the audience will wait with them until it does. They simply accept that they have the right to fill a space with their sound in the first place. Now, I don't want to generalize, but I have noticed that for some women, this exercise is more valuable in helping them to slow down the pace of their delivery. So for the women, the breaths are acting more like speed bumps on the highway of their speech. Because for them, the question is developing comfort in taking space vocally in the first place. So usually they will just try to get through it quickly. It's the vocal or verbal equivalent of, I don't want to take up too much of your time in an email. So this breath work helps them develop more comfort and ease with navigating that sonic space. And it's understandable that women may need time to develop comfort with that navigation. In Lake Bell's film called In a World, the hero, Carol, and her father, who's a successful voiceover artist, are talking about his line of work. And he tells her, quote, "Let's face it, the industry does not crave a female sound." And she replies, "Dad, you've made me painfully aware of that my whole life." His response is, "I'm not being sexist, that's just the truth." So if our model for leadership is overwhelmingly male, does fitness for leadership mean sounding the way men sound? This may have been true in the past, but I do think it's changing, as Robin Given pointed out in the Washington Post article. People will argue that it's not a gender thing. They truly find certain sounds less pleasant, just a bit grating. And that's when we hear those words like shrill or babyish or strident. So I'm willing to accept that maybe it's not a gender thing. I just don't often hear those words applied to male voices. So, how can we lift that restriction in order to benefit from more great female leadership? I think there's something about tuning our ears to the life experience conveyed through a lot of different pitches and resonances. Because resonance, pitch, timbre, all of those things, each woman has her own, as her body, her breathing, her way of forming and articulating her words, and of course, her very life experiences will manifest in her own individual sound and idiolect. And in this, there are so many possibilities. I just want to come back to Cleopatra at the end of the story that Shakespeare wrote. In the end of the story, when the Romans invade, a Roman soldier offers Cleopatra a way out, a possible escape from the punishment of Caesar. This soldier says, "He knows that you embraced not Antony as you did love, but as you feared him." So he suggests to Cleopatra, "We know you weren't really in love with Antony. You were just doing what he told you because you were afraid of him." Cleopatra's response is one word, "Oh." What I love about that Elizabethan "oh" is that it could mean virtually anything. And when Shakespeare writes "oh," it's not OH, it's just "oh." It's more a symbol than a word. So, what is happening in that moment? Is Cleopatra gasping and surprised because this wasn't what she expected the soldier to say? Is she wailing, releasing all her pent up rage against Antony, against the Romans, at her situation? Or is she simply stalling for time? Or is she laughing? There are so many possibilities. Shakespeare seems to indicate that the character expresses something here, and the actor will choose what that is. And there's so much potential for a female leader to formulate her strategy in one character, and it all comes down to one symbol of a circle, the ancient symbol of wholeness, of feminine energy, potential, the cycle repeating. In this play, Cleopatra is the center of the story. She occupies the text, the imagery, the words throughout. And when she is ready to move on, she will be the one who lights the little O, the earth, as she described in her eulogy for the person she loves. So she leaves us with O. She speaks and is silent according to her own will. She is the master of her own fate. So to finish, what can I say about Cleopatra, about women's voices, about women's leadership? I think it's probably enough just to use her own word. Oh, the possibilities are endless. Thank you.